looks at her and he says, well, I'll go, but I'm not going without you. You know, back in those days, that was unheard of. You can't go to war unless this woman goes with you. I guess they had that kind of confidence in her relationship with the Lord. I don't know. I didn't have time to go back and look all that stuff up. And then the other one was Gideon. So y'all just need to go back and review that and catch up, because we got to be doing Samson today. And Samson is a right interesting little character. I was going to put in a commercial this morning right quick. All you people in here this morning that know what Saturday is? Anybody know what Saturday is? Seaboard Festival, Lexington. Apple pies. If you've never experienced that, you don't know what you're missing. I'm going to put in a little mini job application. If you can't go and spend the whole day at Hamlet, and I can't say this about Lexington because I wouldn't ride to Lexington, stay a couple of hours and come back. That would just wear me out. I couldn't do it. But if you only got 2 hours to spare, you can come on to Hamlet and get your hands dirty for 2 hours and enjoy. You'll have a lot. You really have a lot of fun. It's hard work, but you'll have a lot of fun because you see people. That's the only time you see these people once a year at the Seaboard Festival, because people will come into town for the Seaboard Festival, and they usually come by, and some of them just come by and say hey. Some of them come by and want to know where this church is because they think we do that stuff all the time, and they can come and get apple pies on other times. I guess they want directions to the church. But it's a lot of fun, and like I say, you see people that you hadn't seen in a year. And I can attest to, I can't eat them anymore because I'm absolutely too sweet, regardless of what people think. I've got documentation that says I'm too sweet. But I used to go down there when, was it Statesville, Darrell, that used to come? When Statesville used to do that, I would go down to the Seaboard Festival, and they had them all the way down to the end of Main Street over in that corner, because usually the line was so long, and that kept them from, I guess, from getting in the way. But I'd walk all the way down there and buy about 6 fried apple pies, put them in my little brown bag, walk all the way back to my car, and I went home. That's the only thing I went for was fried apple pies. So I think it's fun. It's exhausting. And, of course, we're doing hot dogs Saturday night down in it, so we're just going to eat all day Saturday, I reckon. But anyway, if you want to donate a few hours of your time and you can't go to Lexington, come on to Hamlet, even if you only got a couple of hours. Lexington, if you've got all day, pray.
What day is it?
Saturday.
Next Saturday.
This coming up Saturday, 25th, 24th, 25th. Yeah, Lexington does a lot of whatever. And I am not kidding you. The first time we went to Lexington, I am not exaggerating. That line went on forever. And I stood there and I prayed, God, please make these people get out of this line. Just make them go away till we get caught up, Lord. Just let us get a little bit ahead so they don't have to stand here and stare at you. Just please, Lord, make them move. I saw more people get in line. Trisha Yearwood was the featured entertainer, or one of them that year, and she was getting ready to take the stage right over there. And I thought, oh, they'll go watch Trisha Yearwood. Not one soul got out of that line. Not even Trisha Yearwood could compete with fried apple pies. And I found out later, while I was praying for the Lord to make them go away till we got caught up, Brother Cruz was back there praying, Lord, send them on. So I found out who got a prayer through that day, because one lady walked up to me when it was over. In case y'all don't know, Lexington is supposed to be a barbecue festival. It's supposed to be barbecue. Some ladies came up to me as we were getting ready to close, and ladies whispered, she said, honey, is this where they have the barbecue? I looked at her and I said, ma'am, you can't prove by me they got any barbecue up here. I hadn't seen no barbecue. Hadn't had time to go look for any. That's how busy you stay up there. But it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, so many of the people that used to go and do all this stuff are no longer able to go, either physically or they have got their wings and they've gone on home. But
That's us.
that's it. I mean, I could stand up here and count the ones that used to. Gordy and Joe used to go to all of them. We used to do 3. Asheboro we used to do, and we quit doing Asheboro. But anyway, into the lesson this morning on the unusual strength of Samson. He had the kind of strength that most young men would want to have. You know, he was just real strong, able-bodied person. I don't know what I do with my notes. But it says, unusual strength, Samson. Christians should be singularly focused on fulfilling God's purpose for their lives. That is what we need to be doing. We don't need to be worrying about things that's going on. You know, if you watch too much of the news right now, you'll get paranoid. If you watch enough of it, you might get schizophrenic, because it is just, we're living in a crazy world. When people grown-ups don't have anything better to do than go walk up and down the streets, and I'm not sure what they're doing. I can't figure it out, but my attitude is if y'all had to work, if you had a job and you had to work on Saturday, you couldn't get out here and do this stuff. You'd be home, you'd be at work. But to each his own, people can do what they want to do. It ain't none of my concern. But this lesson studies Samson's birth announcement, his life, and his triumph in death. Although he was often driven by sinful appetites and passions, God used him as a response to the Philistines' oppression of Israel. Even though we would say that Samson was rather immoral, he had very low moral standards, but God still used him, and used him in a mighty way. He was a judge in the nation of Israel. I went back and I was looking that up, and there was more judges than I thought there were. And there was one in there, Elon, and somebody had put beside of his name Musk, and I thought it was a joke, so I left him off my list. But there really was a judge named Elon. I had to go back and add him. That was not his last name, but I had to go back and add him. But God delivered Israel into the hands of the Philistines. But God also set boundaries concerning how much any nation could oppress his people. You're not going to do but so much to Israel before you have to answer to God. And I go back, and you can read all the history you want to read, but there's little Israel, surrounded by enemies. And yet, there's where she stays. There's a scripture somewhere in the Bible that talks about a nation being born in a day. If you go back to 1948, you'll find out that Israel as a nation was recognized, this side of whatever, in 1948. I think I got the right date. Huh? 1948's right, isn't it? You can tell I didn't do real good in history. But anyway, lost my place. Although Samson took his role and responsibility too casually, thus eventually losing both his eyes and his freedom, he returned to his anointed role in a moment of spiritual clarity, and he won a great victory through his death. As we get on over here, we'll probably not get there, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you, he killed more Philistines at his death than he did in life. Because even at death, he was still fighting, and he still won that battle. Most kids can tell you the story of Samson, and I was studying, and I think, Lord, this is going to be kind of, these easy lessons get hard. You know, you think you know Samson, and everybody in here can tell the story of Samson and Delilah. There used to be songs, I think, about Samson and Delilah, and even somebody did one time that was nothing but old Delilah, and I can't remember who sang that, but somebody did it. But he fell in love with a woman. Now, somewhere along the line, Samson had been married. I did find that. He had been married somewhere along the line, but somehow, through the politics of that day, they took his wife and gave her to somebody else. So, when it comes to Delilah, I kept looking to see if I could find any place where Samson and Delilah ever got married, and they didn't. So this, I guess, would be maybe a concubine, I don't know what you call them, but whatever. This was his love, whatever. You can see I don't know real well with these things. But anyway, Samson and Delilah, people sing about them, the children know about them, people make jokes about them and all that good stuff. But it served a purpose. God's plan is not always something we can understand. This is not the way I would have solved this problem. Most people sitting in here, this is not the way you would handle this problem. If you'd come up upon a problem in which another nation was getting ready to invade your nation, this is not the way you would solve that issue. You know, we would handle it entirely different. There's a question in here that says, ask the students to name some examples of biblical leaders whom God used in powerful ways, but who also experienced significant failures in their lives. And the first person you think about is David, King David. And all that he did and all that he was able to accomplish and all that God used him for, but you look at how many times David failed God. You know, when Saul, that stayed Saul, not Paul that became, not Saul that became Paul, Saul that stayed Paul, stayed Saul. Saul was a king appointed by God, and yet he failed God miserably. And in the end, he lost the kingdom, and the person that won basically got the kingdom at his death was David. But the Bible says that David was a man after God's own heart, but look at all the things that David did that was wrong. But yet, he still did what God had appointed him to do. It says, although all believers in Jesus are called to holiness as their standard for life, it is also true that we often fall short. Oh, I wouldn't want to have to stand up here and do a whole long discussion on that. The wonderful truth is that in Jesus we have an advocate with the Father who intercedes with us and will forgive us if we ask. Who is our intercessor? Jesus. When we are going through something, when we have a problem, Jesus intercedes with the Father. Now, the closest I can come to this is going into a courtroom. Now, I've been to court a few times, not because I did anything wrong. I've been to court a few times. I've testified in cases that I got involved in because of work and stuff. And I watched people. One particular time I was in court, and I watched the defense attorney, and I admit that in my own opinion, the man that he was trying to defend was, what's the word? Undefensible, indefensible. Indefensible, right? There was no excuse for what he did. But I could have done a better job of defending him than his lawyer did. His lawyer didn't do anything. But when we get into problems, when we fail or when we have issues that we don't know how to solve, we have an intercessor. And just like a lawyer, if you have to go to court, your lawyer intercedes for you to the judge. He's supposed to be able to present a case to the judge while he is explaining things to a jury that will be responsible for saying innocent or guilty. But that lawyer is supposed to intercede. And then the closest thing we can come to, that's the closest definition we can come to seeing Jesus as our intercessor between us and the Father. And I think about it sometimes, we need intercessors today. We need people that are willing to stand in the gap and pray for other people and pray and let our intercessor take that prayer to God to get that prayer answered. Now, I don't know about y'all, but all my loved ones are not saved. Now, y'all might can say, well, all of mine are. And I think, well, praise the Lord. I'll give you a list. If you don't need to pray for your family anymore, I'll give you a list and I'll let you pray for mine. Because we got lots and lots. Oh, I got cousins all over everywhere. I'm like Becky. I got a lot of cousins. But we need to understand that there is a purpose for everything, even what Samson wound up doing in the end. Most of the verses that are in here are not in our lessons. I'm going to try to stay with the lesson and not read all of them. You'll just need to read them for yourself because we won't ever get through. But he was born for a purpose. He was a consecrated child. This is found in Judges 13, 1 through 5, and only 3 through 5 is in our lesson. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, behold, thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. For the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now this is almost like listening to Elizabeth being told that John the Baptist would be born. Mary was told when Jesus would be born. Samson's mother was told that she would have a child and that it would be a son. And she was given instructions on what she should not do while she was carrying that child. And it's good information and it's good things that people should follow today, because one of the first things they'll tell you if you become pregnant is don't drink. Don't drink. Because alcohol can have an adverse effect on a fetus. You should not drink when you're pregnant. It also says don't eat certain foods. Now, back then, unclean foods would be a lot of stuff that we eat every day now, or just about every day, because most people get up in the morning, you have sausage, or you have bacon. If you're lucky, you might have a little piece of country ham every once in a while. And you can make some red-eye gravy if you do. Granddaddy used to put that stuff on his plate, and it made it look so good, and I just cannot bring myself to eat that stuff. But you can have a little red-eye gravy to go with your breakfast. But back in biblical days, they did not eat that sort of stuff. And guess what? Today, they tell you don't eat a whole lot of pork. What's one thing it does? Blood pressure. You have to be careful with some of the foods that we eat. And the angel went ahead and told her ahead of time, don't drink any alcohol. Stay away from wine. And don't eat unclean foods. Eat healthy, and that's basically the same advice that women are given today. I used to get in trouble all the time for eating before Brian was born. I came home and spent a few days, and I went back and had to go to the doctor and weigh, and I had to see the same mean doctor. If I gained a pound, he's who I would see. And he looked at me and he said, what have you been eating? And I said, tomato sandwiches. I'd been home. I've been eating tomatoes right out of the garden. And he looked at me and he said, well, that's good. That's good. You can have all the tomato sandwiches you want. Leave off the bread and the mayonnaise. But eat healthy. She was given instructions on what to do, and those instructions, we could do well to follow them now. But it says that for the seventh time in Judges, the text says, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. In the other text, if you keep reading. This time, Israel will experience oppression for 40 years. This was the longest period of oppression listed in Judges. And as always the case, their evil included idol worship. You'll find that in Judges 10 and 6, because it states that in addition to their other false gods, Israel served the gods of the Philistines and forsook the Lord and did not serve him. You know, sometimes that's hard for us to believe, that they watched what God did for them, how God brought them out of Egypt. I almost said out of Israel. How God brought them out of Egypt, how he brought them through the wilderness, how he parted the Red Sea. When Moses spoke to a rock, it put forth water. And then the next time God told Moses to speak to the rock, he got mad and he hit it. And because of that failure, he didn't get to go into the promised land. He had to stop. But after God had done all of that, here they are out here worshiping false gods. And we have to do a lot of inventory, because sometimes when we look around and we see what God has done for us, we sometimes forget. And you don't have to have a little statue that you kneel down to be guilty of idol worship if you're not careful, because anything that you put before God will become your idol, whatever it is. And we have to be careful that we don't let other things become more important than God. You know, anything that we put before God can become an idol. Unlike other accounts of the cycle of sin, disobedience, punishment, repentance, and deliverance, this time the text does not state that Israel cried out unto the Lord. Instead, God sovereignly chose to raise up a judge. God made a decision that somebody needed to come in here, and I'm going to paraphrase a whole lot. He made a decision that he was going to put somebody here and let them rule over or make decisions for Israel. The judge, somebody that would judge what they could and could not do, whether they were right or wrong and things that they did. And he appointed Samson as a judge when he got older. And it goes on to say, in this particular case, the judge had not yet been born, but God found a childless couple, and the angel appeared unto the wife of Manoah with a promise that she would conceive and give birth to a son. Now, back in those cultural days, it was a big deal that you had a son. Because when you got older, I don't like the word old, when you got older and you weren't able to do a certain amount of stuff anymore, it was the son's responsibility to take care of the parents. Children, are you listening? It was the responsibility of the children to take care of the parents. Now, some cultures, it was the oldest child. But I think I toured Amish country, Amish, can't say it this morning, country one time, and I think in that particular religion, I think it's the youngest son that inherits the house, and he is responsible for taking care of the parents. I think that's right. I'll have to look it up. Should have looked it up. I didn't think about it. It just popped into my head. The unique thing about this child was he was to be committed to the Nazarene vow from birth throughout his life, and somewhere I looked that up. Basically, it is they needed to abstain from wine. What was Mama told? Don't drink wine. And here, as part of the vow that the Nazarites took, they were forbidden to drink any form of alcohol, including wine. You know, some people think that Wine's okay. You can drink all the wine you want to. I never found any I like myself, but be that ever as it may be. But they were forbidden from drinking any kind of wine, any form of alcohol, including wine. They could not drink strong drink or vinegar made from any of this stuff. Also prohibited from consuming any products made from the grape. Now, I love grapes. That's probably my favorite fruit. But they were forbidden from eating grapes. They couldn't have anything from the grapevine. They could not have the grapes themselves, the raisins, which is not a thing, but dried up grapes, in case y'all get upset and worried about it. They couldn't have raisins. They couldn't have any of the seeds out of the grapes, and they couldn't have the skins. Now, I'm not much of a canner, but you make jelly out of something and jam out of something else, and one of them is the hull of the, y'all don't cook either. The hull is used to make one or the other of them, and I forget which, and I think it's the juice makes the other one. I don't know. You can tell I've never made any. They could not cut their hair. You got people running loose now. You look at them sometimes, you think, well, they must be made a vow to be a Nazarite because they ain't cut their hair in a long time. They ain't washed it either, and that's the bad thing. The Nazarite must not cut his hair for the entire duration of the vow. Now, with Samson, this is what his mother was to raise him up to do. Now, there are other places where people took a vow to be a Nazarite for a period of time. And at the end of that time, then they went back to cutting their hair, I guess, and drinking their wine, because it just had lasted during the period of time that they had made that vow. The hair growth symbolizes their consecration and separation to God. It separated them out. Now, there's a lot of people running around today that don't cut their hair, then it doesn't have anything to do with them being separated out for God. At least I don't think so. But they're different. But back in those days, this was part of a vow that they took. They were to avoid contact with any dead people. They could not touch or come in contact with anybody, with any dead body, even that of a close family member, as this causes a ritual uncleanliness. So they could not come in contact with dead people. And I looked it up because some people think it's the same thing, but there's a difference in being a Nazarene, which is what Jesus was, which just means he was from Nazareth, whereas Nazarite is a sect, and it is a vow that you take before God that you'll follow certain rules that are set out for them to follow. But anyway. Whew, that was loud. The Nazarite vow was stricter than even the requirements for a priest, and it involved no alcoholic drink of any kind, and anything that was made from grapes. They just kept emphasizing that. No wine. No wine. You would think that we were teaching this lesson in France that they drink a lot of wine. Around here, we drink a lot of sweet tea. We went out to eat the other night, and Jackie thought she told the woman to just bring my tea half and half, and I said, no, I have to have unsweetened tea. But I thought one glass won't hurt. I took a little sip of that tea, and I thought, good Lord, there's a cup and a half in that one glass of tea. So I had to tell her, I'm sorry. Just bring me some unsweetened tea. Can't handle this. I thought I'd be in a coma by the end of the night if I drunk enough of it. Never tasted anything quite that sweet. And I used to love sweet tea, but they made that just for me. In addition, again, he couldn't cut his hair while he was observing this vow, which in Samson's case meant that he was never to cut his hair. It was a commitment to a life wholly devoted and consecrated to the Lord. The angel that went to tell Manoah's wife that her son shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. That's in verse 5. Unlike other judges who won decisive victories over their oppressors, Samson would begin the process of deliverance, which would continue under Samuel, under Saul, and under David. Samson was not the closure. He was the person who started it out. He was the beginning of what would be done. The next section in here, I got a little note. This is not in the book, and I'm not going to read it. I'm going to just go through this because we don't have time. It's in Judges 13, 6 through 14, and it says his wife, or Samson's mother, was described her encounter with the angel to her husband. She's trying to tell her husband what happened. She called the angel a man of God, but said his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, and it was very terrible. That would be found in Judges 13 and 6. She then repeated the instructions that the angel had given her concerning the promised son. Hearing the words of his wife, Manoah prayed for the Lord to send the man of God again to provide further instructions concerning how the child was to be raised. That's in verse 8. Would it not be a great thing if everybody that had children nowadays would pray and ask the Lord to show me how to raise this child? Because they don't come with any instructions. Anybody in here that might be, well, I don't reckon there's anybody in here that's planning on having any. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all, y'all can't see what's going on over here. Anyway, wouldn't it be great if everybody that decided to bring a child into the world prayed and asked God to give them the wisdom, the strength, the patience, the understanding, the long suffering to raise a child? Because it is not an easy task. Now, I can't speak for fathers. I kind of played both roles part-time. But mothers, you have those little critters 24/7. Now, if you go back to work, you eventually get a break, and that's what your work becomes, a break. Because they wake up at night. They wake you up. You have to get up, do whatever needs to be done, and then you go back to sleep. And they'll wake you up again. And out of all of that, you still love them. You still love them. From the day that you find out you're going to have a baby until they are grown and they're making grandma and grandpa out of you. You still love those little critters. But they don't come with any kind of instructions. But the Father is praying to God, send that man back and let him tell us how to raise this child that you're giving us, because you have given us already certain instructions of what needs to be done and what don't need to be done, and we may need a few more instructions. Again, they never came with any kind of instructions. Now, everything you buy nowadays, even though nobody reads instructions, everything comes with instructions. But most of the time, instead of reading the instructions, we Google it. I put together a gas grill one time. And I read the instructions, and I thought, Lord, that don't make a bit of sense to me. So I looked at the picture. And after I looked at the picture, I could put the grill together. But I could not read the instructions. They didn't make no sense to me. And nowadays, if you actually get instructions, the print is so small you can't see it if you're over the age of 25. You can't see that stuff. Saw that.
And people were criticizing him about it. And, I thought that was pretty good. He's going to raise them the right way. Now, it didn't say he was going to raise them Christian, but he said tradition. And not let them see all some of this stuff and everything. So I think he was talking about old cartoons. Some of the stuff that's on cartoons. He wasn't going to let them watch the cartoons and stuff like that. And people criticized him about it. We raise our children the best we can. People are going to criticize us if we do one way or if we do the other way. And it's kind of like I told Eric one time. He told me he'd call social services over. And that didn't go too good. But I told him, I said, as long as you put your feet under my table, you're going to do like I say. But I thought that was pretty good. He come out and just said, here's what I'm doing. And then people want to criticize him.
I saw that, and I get tickled at people, because if you look at what people object to, they object to people correcting their children. Now, my mother would get us and she'd say, go get a switch. Well, we didn't have a switch bush at our house. And guess what? I got some growing wild at my house now. One of them's covered up my window. I didn't know they got that big. You had to go to Grandma's and get a switch. And when it came back, you better make sure you had a good one. It was not a good idea to go cut one of them little bitty ones and come back and give it to Mama, because that's not what she wanted. But they criticize and they don't want you to correct your children. And because people don't correct their children, look at what the world has become. People think they can walk into a store and steal, take stuff that they didn't work for. They think they can destroy your property, and there should be no consequences. Now, I have this hang-up. It's a big hang-up because I live down a dirt road. If you are going to buy your child a four-wheeler, go buy at least an acre of land, and you let them tear up your land and stay off of mine. Because in the wee hours of the night, it has gone through my dumb head, why don't you just go shoot up in the air a couple of times? They won't come back. But then the wise side of my head said that what goes up must come down. And you have no way of knowing where it's going to come down at, so don't do that. Just roll over, pray some more, and go back to sleep. Because people don't discipline their children. You see kids in a store, and I think, dear Lord, I wouldn't take that thing out in public. One of my children made the mistake one time. And I say one of them, and it wouldn't be the one y'all would think. In the grocery store, that child flung himself down on the floor. The word is threw, but y'all know what flung means. Flung himself down on the floor, kicked his little feet, did his little hands on the floor, and I thought, God, I'll kill him. So I walked off and left him. Now, I went down to the end of the aisle where I could peep around and see, make sure nobody didn't hurt him or take him, to see what he was doing. And all of a sudden, he sat up. Mama! I thought, I'm going to act like I don't know who he is. And he comes running up, Mama, you left me. I said, I don't know who you are. I just kept on going. Mama, you left me. I said, little boy, I don't know who you are. I don't have a child that would behave like that in public. And he never did again. And no, I did not touch him. I wanted to. But they had certain instructions. Nowadays, if people had instructions on how to raise children, we might not have so many kids in prison. You might not have so many people getting in trouble. This is not Samson. I didn't know where that, Brother Cruz would say I'm mid and get back in here. But when Manoah had the chance, he asked the angel how the child was to be raised, and the angel essentially said, I already told your wife, gentlemen. The angel had already spoke to the wife, given the wife instructions, and left it up to the wife to tell the husband, this is what you're going to do. Not quite what that culture did back then. But he was basically saying, I already told your wife, and you need to do that. The angel reiterated the need for the woman to observe a form of the Nazirite vow before and during her pregnancy. Again, don't drink alcohol. Don't eat foods that are not healthy. Don't do things that you would not do in an ordinary day. Samson was consecrated to the Lord. Manoah did not recognize that this man was an angel, so he offered Middle Eastern hospitality with a meal, but the angel told him to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Manoah asked the angel his name, and he said it was secret. But the Hebrew word for secret also means wonderful. He was bringing wonderful news, because most people, when you find out you're going to have that little baby, that's the most wonderful news you could get. Until you realize you got to feed him, you got to clothe him, you got to buy shoes. Eventually, you're going to buy a car, at least one. You're going to buy a car. And then lo and behold, they get out of high school. Your senior year is the most expensive year. It didn't cost that much to go to 12th grade when I was in school. And then you got to pay their way through college. You laugh, you got a long way to go. You got a long way to go. And it's really rough when you got two of them that get driver's license real close together, and you watch that car insurance go ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. But anyway, Manoah killed a young goat, and he laid it on a rock as a sacrifice, and the flame of fire came up from the rock to consume it, and the angel ascended into heaven in the flame. Manoah suddenly realized that he had been in the presence of God, and he feared that they would die. But his wife wisely observed that if God had intended to kill him, then he would not have received the sacrifice. If God had intended to strike them down for whatever reason, then God would not have received the sacrifice. We don't understand that sometime today because we don't do sacrifice like they did back then. We wouldn't know, most of us, would have to read the whole Old Testament all over again at least twice to figure out how to do the sacrifice in the first place, because we've never done that. Now, there's certain times when I could burn the meat with no problems, but other than that, no. Samson's weakness is exposed, and this is in Judges 16, 14 through 17, and there's only a couple of these, 4 through 17, excuse me. The only thing in our book is the 5th, the 15th, and the 17th, and basically it's talking about, and you go through this, and you think, how could Samson have been so dumb? It was just dumb. Here this woman, she was approached by some of the Philistine leaders, and they asked her, why is he so strong? And of course, she didn't know, she didn't have any idea. She didn't have any clue why this man was stronger than everybody else. So they said, we'll give you a certain amount of money, and you find out, if you find out what we can do, what to do to make him weak so that he can be captured. Well, they went through all these different things, and of course he lied several times and told them different things, and he was too dumb to figure out what the woman was doing. And so he continued to talk to her and continued to tell her. Now, at one point in time, I think he said if they wove so many ropes together and bound him with those ropes, then he would be just like anybody else. He wouldn't be able to break the ropes. So she did that, or had the Philistines do that while he was asleep. And then she hollered at him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he jumps up, breaks the rope, and he's ready to go. Then she gets all upset and plays the damsel, and she goes on about, oh, how you lied, what you did, and she went through several other things. And then finally he got tired of listening to her. And he says, my hair has never been cut. If you cut my hair, then I will be just like anybody else. And I think somewhere where I was reading in here, he went to sleep with his head in her lap. And she called for the Philistines to come in, and they cut all of Samson's hair off. And she hollered again, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he jumped up, not even realizing that God had left him, that he was on his own. He was just a regular person. They captured him, and the first thing they did, according to this, was they put his eyes out. And he wouldn't be able to see. He couldn't see anything around him. They let him off. They put him in prison, and I'm doing a whole lot of skipping. They put him in prison, and then they used him to entertain people. They made a slave out of him, and basically they made a joke out of him. They made a joke out of this man that had been close to God. He had been there, living the life, living the way that God had told him to live, following certain rules, and then yet he failed God. And originally he didn't realize that what he had done had cost him that relationship with God. You know, sometimes we do things, and it cost us our relationship with God. But what do we get to do? We just get to pray and say, Lord, that's my 15th mistake for today. And you pray. Samson was just, to me, he was in shock because he didn't realize what he had done. Didn't realize that she would deceive him like that and then turn him in. But having discovered his secret, Delilah summons the leaders of the Philistines, telling them that what Samson had told her and that it was the truth. So they came in, cut his hair, they paid her, and all of his strength went out from him. So when she told him that the Philistines were there, he jumped up as always. It says in here from verse 20, he did not realize that the Lord had departed from him through his ignorance. Samson had violated his vow, and the Spirit no longer anointed him with supreme or supernatural strength. As a result, the Philistines were able to subdue him, put out his eyes, took him to Gaza, and they bind him in fetters to a millstone where he would grind grain. If you've seen movies where they are attached and they walk around and this big rock will grind the grain. Then they would bring him out and make fun of him. And so on this particular day, they were bringing him out, as in Judges 16, 22 through 23, which is also not in the book, just 26 is in the book. That's 20. Where's 26? Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me that I may feel the pillows whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. They were making fun of him. He couldn't see, he couldn't do anything, and he was being led by a child. A child had his hand and led him out. And they had laughed at him, made fun of him, and they were doing this big worship to their god, Dagon, that was their false god, their false idol. It says that Samson was in prison. He was chained to the mill. The Philistines believed that they had ended his attacks upon them, but Samson's hair grew as time passed, and he renewed his vow to God. His hair grew, but he also still had to renew his vow before the Lord. When they gathered for a great assembly to worship their false god, Dagon, they proclaimed that their God had delivered Samson into their hands, and they brought Samson out of the prison area so that they could chain him between the pillars to humiliate him further. But he said to the little boy, just take me over here and let me lean on the pillars. Let me lean on the pillars. And when he did, Samson prayed. And he asked the Lord to just let him die with the Philistines. But he was going to bring them down while they're worshiping this false god. The little boy took him over there and laid his hands on the two columns so that he could feel, he knew where he was, and it says all his strength had come back. He pushed against those columns, it's easier to say columns. It pushed against those columns and the whole building fell down. And even though it cost Samson his life, the Bible says that he killed more Philistines in his death than he did in life. But part of the reason that he could do that was because he came to himself and realized that he had given up a relationship with God, and that was the most important thing that he had ever had, was his relationship with the Lord. Today, the most important thing that we have is our relationship with God. Because as long as you have that strong relationship with God, you can get through anything. Anything. You know, we've got people in here that are sick, that have been sick. Some have been sick and they're well. Some are sick and they're not yet well. We have people that have been through some rough times. Faye, you had your house broken into a few years ago, right? Jackie's been broken into. I can't imagine that. You know, to come home. I told somebody the other day, if they break in, I hope they clean up while they're there. Do the dusting. Maybe I should paint the dust gold, and they'll think it's gold dust. If anybody ever breaks in, they'll take all that dust out with them when they go. Because I hate to dust. Y'all know I hate to dust. But his hair had grown back, and he began to pray, and he put his hands on the main pillars. He prayed for God to anoint and strengthen him one more time so that he could avenge the loss of his eyes. He also knew that he would silence the sound of praise to the Philistines' false god. God heard, he honored this prayer, and with his hand on the pillar, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pulled or twisted the pillars off their stone base, causing the whole house to collapse upon all the dignitaries and all the people gathered there to worship the false god. The text states that Samson killed more in a single act than he had killed during his entire life. That's in verse 30 of the 16th chapter of Judges. When the news of this event reached Samson's family, they came and they retrieved his body from among the Philistines and buried him in the tomb with his father. Samson's a very unique person. Most of the verses that were in the lesson part are not in your book, so you need to go back and read this part of Judges. And next week, I think, are we going one more Judge? I forget. Nope, we're going next week. We're going into Philippians and Colossians. We're getting back into the New Testament, which is a little bit easier for people like me. Any comments? If not, thank you for your attendance and thank you for your attention. And don't forget the Seaboard Festival. And like I say, if you can't work all day, you can come to Hamlet, work a short period of time. It's a long drive to go to Lexington and work 2